Thank you, Peter, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I find myself in a bit of a difficult situation here. I've got to talk about the wider challenges of production-based electrification. It's what you've paid your money for. That's going to be a bit difficult because I've been agitating on the subject of rolling programs of electrification. I've been doing that for about 15 years, and what I've actually waited for is what's happened this morning with Team Scotland. Hugely impressive. I thought it would be many years before I would see a civil servant and an asset manager as leadership sitting, talking the same messages, absolutely seamlessly together. And that gives me a little bit of a problem because it actually takes out a few of my slides. I could not do it the justice that you've done, Alan. So I will probably have to fall back onto my other passion, decarbonisation. And if all else fails, then let's talk about the national major feed-in diagram. But unfortunately, Paul, Megan, wherever you are, you've taken that one out as well. So we're going to have to improvise a little. And I'm going to do two things. I'm going to try and reinforce some of the things that I think have been missed. There's not many of them. But I am going to improvise and I'm going to go further. I'm going to challenge us as an industry to go further. So let's start with a nice exercise. Let's start with a game of the odd one out. So 4 projects. What's the odd one out? Well, it's easy. It's Great Western Electrification. Why is it the odd one out? Well, it's not a project, is it? We've found that out. The definition of a project, if you look it up in the dictionary, is a unique undertaking with a start and a finish. And I can look at 3 of those, and hopefully the Queen will help me out on a Tuesday soon and cut a ribbon somewhere down in London, but there are 3 there that are done. But let's take ourselves back to the start of Great Western Electrification. If you're a project manager, and if you believe that that was an electrification project, then it had an objective. Do you remember what that objective was? It was electrify to Newbury, the commercial centre of Bristol, Bristol Templemead Station, Swansea, and Oxford. Now, Kate, where are you? We might need to get the LinkedIn going. Breaking news from the PWI conference. Great Western Electrification isn't finished. We've only got to Cardiff. And we've got to Newbury. So we've got to Newbury. So there's a bit to go there. But don't take my word for it. I'm just going to let you read some quotes on each of these projects. And if we do apply the success criteria of Great Western being completed, i.e. one of the 4 objectives done, that would be the same as digging half of the eastbound tunnel on Crossrail, sticking in a couple of stations and calling it a day. It would be the same as watching Premiership football under one floodlight. Just sharing with you there the pain and misery that we've been with some of those iconic projects. But I did call them iconic, and as time goes by, people look back on them fondly, don't they? You know, when I travel back from France under the Channel Tunnel with my children, I'm explaining to them that we're actually time travelling. You know, that we are actually arriving before we've left. I'm not talking about the banks that went under. I'm not talking about the millions of people that lost money on that bet. But there are other rolling programs of infrastructure around, some of them involving volts and amps, that are successful. And we have to think about it because we don't know much about it. The only thing we see in the press is let's have more of it. We don't see the bad news we have with some of the electrification projects. So there we go. 4 programs. Excuse me with the bottom right, bit of symmetry with the slides. I wanted to involve a successful electrification project, but with the time and what's been covered, I don't think that's appropriate. But focus on the other 3. And again, I'm just going to flick to some quotes about those programs. There we go. So there are infrastructure rolling programs out there, not subsidised by the taxpayer, paid for wholly by the users, and they are working, and they are there. So I'm going to talk about what is the difference between that first slide and the next slide. And the previous speakers have covered a lot of it, but this is where I'm going to try and push a bit harder, set a few more challenges. So let's look at the key differences. So we all talk about the production-based program, focus on unit costs, I've got a new term for it now, on net cost. That's what we've got to refer to it. I think it's a great target in Scotland to look at 2 million per single track kilometre. I think Team England, wherever we are, it's a bit difficult to know who we are, Team England, but we're currently performing at 3 million. And I think the next challenge is that we can go further, and we haven't mentioned it today, but we've got to be able to get towards an eventual target of £1 million per single track kilometre. We've got to deal with our overheads. I'll start with prelims. Some of our contracts, we're looking at 50%, 70% prelims. That's very much focused on the supply chain. That's not half the story. When we start adding on our delivery partners, our consultants, and the levels of project management and checking that go on top of that, more overhead, we're not talking about percentage of the real work, we're talking about multiples of the real work. And we can get to, quite easily, 10 times more cost added on than the actual cost of physically getting the work done with the materials. The example I would give is if we said a Ford Focus costs 20 grand to come off the production line, it's like us as an industry putting it in the showroom with a sign on the windshield that says £200,000. That's where we're performing when we're talking about wanting to be in a manufacturing world. We've got a long way to go there. So the whole industry has got to start tackling the non-value added. Multiple work packages, that's got to come. We've got to get people focused on what they're good at, on their core things, and we've got to give them the opportunity to learn, to do a plan, do, check, act cycle so that they can then improve and share the benefits of that. And I think that's what we've heard from Scotland. They're doing particularly well. We've talked a bit about innovation. I am nervous about innovation. I think we've really got to focus our innovation on cost reduction. So the stuff we're doing on structures, brilliant. Avoiding that. What we can do is move into areas where we're trying to overcomplicate things, because the manufacturing engineer, the production engineer, removes complexity. They actively seek to avoid that complexity. So as engineers, we've got to be really, really sure that we are solving a problem that we have. Clearances at bridges, that's a problem we've got. That kills us as far as the costs go. But my challenge would be some of those other problems aren't worthy of the amount of money we're spending trying to solve them. Those programs, those rolling programs, the wind turbines, the mobile phone networks, they don't fixate on end dates because they're a program. You know, one day you wake up and your phone is locked onto a 5G network. There's no national paper that is telling you how many days to count down to the new timetable or the new 5G. They're really just in the background, churning the handle, working away on their production. Same with the wind turbines. What we've got to do is break the cycle. And it's very difficult for a project organisation and for a GRIP process to accept that we're going to do things without an end date. It's really, really difficult. And when we have a conversation with government about that, they sort of get that because we can demonstrate how it's gone really badly wrong, but they still want that end date. And we've got to let go of that. And that is going to be a real challenge. Yes, we've got to worry about disruption and how long is disruption going to last, but we don't want to focus on an end date and rolling stock and timetables. Big picture stuff. I think it's the point has been made about decarbonisation, and you can actually, and I did it the other day, I did some maths around it, and you know, I've spent the last 10 years looking at electrical safety. I've been through all of the accidents. I know the statistics. But actually, when we electrify, we've got to have bare conductors. There are risks to the public. There are risks to the workforce. But if we don't decarbonise the planet, every single person on this planet has a shorter lifespan. And unless you're a climate denier, which I would hope amongst the PWI we haven't got many, it's a fact that we have to decarbonise, and whether it is 1 second or 10 milliseconds that every person on the planet is living less, it's a really big number of people on the planet. I checked this morning and it's just under 8 billion. And when you do that maths, you end up with real lives that are being lost if we don't step up to the plate and solve this challenge. There's a real challenge that we've got to get to as well. I've got a view that we've pretty much electrified everything that we need to somewhere in this country at some period in time. I don't think there's many electrification challenges left where you need to do something that's never been done before. Maybe someone here can find something, we can probably look abroad and find the answer. It's all been done. Yet, every time we sit down and we say, this is a fundamental change to the structure. I use those words very carefully because that triggers the management of health and safety at work regulations. And that triggers a whole load of what we do in terms of our safety analysis. CSM significance, same thing. That significance test is basically the same thing. We can put a case forward that Great Britain's railways are electrified. We're just adding to it. Again, I'm going to mention Scotland, but it was 18 months ago. A little nugget, a little acorn, a little nugget there of progress was when one of your team, Alan, was on a conference and said, oh yeah, safety case, we're doing whatever was next, a shops line, I can't remember. What I do remember is they were peeling out the safety case they had for the last job and they were adding an appendix to it. You know, we've got to get a grip of our safety costs because it is not adding the value, and now if it holds us back from the decarbonisation challenge, we've failed as engineers. No structural inefficiencies in the industry. There's lots of them. I'll give you my favourite example. I'm involved in Midland Main Line at the moment. There's a 458 off of Sheffield every morning down to London. Arrives in St Pancras before most of us are up. Now, I would suggest to you that before the pandemic, the taxpayer largely paid for that train. I would say during the pandemic, they paid everything for that train. And I think now, and I wager into the future, the taxpayer will pay to run that train. I'm an electrification engineer. It's really handy for me to knock out the 458 from Sheffield. I want to knock out a few more. That means the taxpayer's paid for that, and now the taxpayer's going to pay again to stop it, to not run it. Now, lots of what we do in the UK and engineering, you can see around the world, you can see the DNA of our British railway engineers around the world. But we don't have lots of people around the world clamouring for Schedule 4 and Schedule 8 saying that's world best practice. So we need to get a grip of that. And my target for Midland Main Line Phase 3 is that we have a 0 Schedule 4. And I don't mean that means we don't have any access. I mean we have a zero Schedule 4 because it's wooden dollars, it's madness. I think I've got a couple more slides. I'm just going to finish on this, which wasn't where I was going to finish, but again, Alan, I think it's probably appropriate for me to finish here. I think in Scotland you can go incremental change. What we've heard today, you've just got to keep doing that. You've got to keep adding, improving. You're doing it. It's a rolling program. You've got to say it's a rolling program, and you keep going, and full power to you. Different for us in England. And I think when we're at £3 million per single track kilometre, the things I've talked about there, to do that across the industry may be a bit too much. But what we can do is we can pilot things. That's the strategy we've got to use. And for me, that's Midland Main Line. That's from Leicester up to Sheffield. We've got to pilot some of these techniques. We've got to get permission. We've got to get the funders. We've got to get all of our stakeholders involved. It's the industry's problem. It's the Bill Reeves. It's all of us that have got to solve this. It's not just the supply chain. It's not just Network Rail. We've all got to have the strength, the courage, the vision to go again, to go even further, because there are other opportunities. The road engineers, they're going to put wires up down the insides of motorways, to move the freight. That will be an abject failure, I think. Certainly I feel it's a failure. We're looking at electrifying long-distance coach networks in Ontario. Hugely exciting, but again, long distance should be trained, shouldn't it? I mean, this is the things we're saying. So look, that's everything I've got to say, and again, mostly because everything important has been said by others. So thank you for that opportunity. Thank you, Peter.
Rob, thanks very much.